I'm so excited to be here. My name is Cristen Torrey. I lead the research team at Figma, but I was also the very first researcher at Figma. And so this talk is about building the team from the very beginning, from the first researcher up. This is not always a pretty story. I'm going to talk about some road bumps, some struggles, and some triumphs. And the reason I'm sharing it with you today is because, one, this is the case study I wish I had 3 years ago. So I'm hoping that this helps people who are just getting started. And two, I'm hoping to find those of you who want to continue building on this conversation. So consider this an invitation. The container for this story is building a research practice, and I will try as much as possible to avoid small tangents, but I have not always been successful with that. I'm just giving you a heads up. The story starts with a blank slate. I'm the first researcher at Figma. I can do whatever I want. And I think what happened was I became obsessed with the possibilities. As researchers, especially ones that read a lot of Medium posts and Twitter feeds, there's so many ideas I have for projects and programs and processes. I'm going to do it all right this time. And I think maybe people will know what happens next, but the big problem with this approach is that you can have a mission. I feel really clear about where I want to go. I care about decision making. I care about people, and that doesn't really give me a way to close that gap. And as this last week has talked about over and over and over again, it's that gap that actually makes the difference. So good research is about getting over that chasm. And what I want to tell you today, the punchline of this whole story, is that what I ended up resolving on was this thing I call outcomes. And I don't care at all whether you call them outcomes or something else. I think what's missing is a really clear articulation of what success looks like that's at a little bit lower altitude than, makes decisions, right? Or supports strategy or something like that, right? Okay, let's go. Part one, I start at Figma. I map out everything that a research team can do. What is a research practice in the large? If you've worked with me, I love a map. So this was really like a very sweet spot for me. I'm influenced quite a bit by maturity models. So D-Scout put out one of these a long time ago. One of the key features of it is that research teams tend to progress over time and they become increasingly independent, less service-oriented. Jared Spool has something similar, right? It's about the progression over time, and mostly I'm just anxious in starting the practice that I just don't want to get stuck, right? In those these things we call low maturity research activities. I'm trying to think about how I leapfrog all of this documentation about what research teams get stuck in, and it's like, how do we move to the good part? How do we just start at the good part? Can we do that? So I start by making this map. On one side of it is all these different types of research projects. These examples, these types of research might be familiar to people who have seen Emma Bolton's research framework. I think this is a super decent way to think about it. Operational work, tactical, strategic, exploratory. The thing that was really attractive to me at the time about it was that I'd struggled for a really long time communicating to people what the difference between strategic and tactical work was. And at least this bookends it with other ideas and sort of creates a little bit of breadth around the research practice. So I'm going with it. Then on the other side, you have all of the infrastructure that lets research projects exist in the world, right? You have insights evangelism, operations. There's probably 16 bubbles in operations. I'm just consolidating it for the purposes of this conversation. But there's an entire other half of this tree that's just about keeping researchers safe, letting them do their best work, and I just want to also acknowledge that from the beginning and set my team up for success. So we have this big thing. Quick tangent. I would love an easier way to reference and remix the models that I have been showing you today. Just if anyone wants to build that, that would be fantastic. Okay, let's move on. So I have 8 types of research here, right, or research activities. And the way that I approached building out the team in the very beginning was to just put bets on all of them, right? So it's just me, and all I'm trying to do is create space for the team that follows me. So I'm doing one project that's at a very high altitude. I'm doing another one that's unmoderated, and it's just, it's about iterating on copy testing. I consolidate everything we know. I put out an insights report, right? I'm just kind of like spreading out all of my energy in different areas. And I think there was really some aspects of that that were successful and I want to advocate for. One, do not wait to be asked for the work, right? The alternative to this approach is to just wait for people to ask you for things. The research practice that you will build that way is not the best research practice that you can build. 2, create a portfolio of examples that are specific to your organization. So in this case, right, I get to go up at an all hands and I get to say, hey, does anyone know what research is? No? Okay, well I have these 4 or 5 examples and that's what it is, right? And like I told you, I gave myself a lot of breadth in the kinds of things I chose, and so that was a really easy conversation to have. And at that point I was like, sweet, like people get it, right? I have space for research here. So big takeaway here, don't let other people's requests define your research practice. They've seen a very small fraction of what is possible. You probably have a much better idea of what your practice should be like than they do. Okay, part 2, in which I have a very robust map and no path through it. And this is where things go off the rails a little bit, right? Because I think you can map a problem space and not really know what to do next. So I have a bunch of activities. I have this high-level mission. I have all of these things. Now I have bets all over the place, right? And nothing is actually really solid, right? Nothing's actually really working. I've placed pretty small bets in all of these areas. With my initial headcount, I actually prioritize the sort of strategic research arm. So for me, that means people who are embedded in product areas whose altitude is something like a quarterly roadmap. Like kind of pick something that feels like it's not the thing that's shipping next, but it's the one after that, and figure out how to make that work. So at least that one, I'm like, okay, one at a time, let's pick them up, stand them up, knock them down. As a quick side note, when you are trying to hire for people with specific skills or interests or aptitude for some parts of these activity maps, it is impossible to find you, right? Everyone's resume says researcher, senior researcher. We just have no standardization in how we talk about what we're good at and what we don't want to do. And it makes it just really hard to find the right people, right, that map to these areas. Okay, brainstorm time. You have these big, you have 8 areas you could potentially work in, right? And even with a very small team and maybe 15 minutes, you can probably brainstorm 100 things your team can do. This is maybe a quarter of what I can come up with on the spot. There is a lot of things that you can do in really every one of these areas. And I think the obvious thing that I hope you're already thinking is involve your stakeholders, right? You need to work with your product and design and other stakeholders to understand what's most important and how to move the needle in terms of building out and expanding your research practice. But I think the thing that I ran into is when you try to think about all of these research types or these categories, and these are kind of made up projects, but you get the point, and you're trying to do your fancy prioritization matrices, your stakeholders have no idea what these research types mean. Absolutely none, right? And I think we fool ourselves into thinking these are obvious, and they're just really not. You can educate people about tactical research and strategic and exploratory, but I would come back 3 months later and people would be like, sorry, what? What's the difference between strategic and exploratory? And honestly, is that the conversation you want to be having It's just tedious. So I have this mission, right, that's like, okay, I can support decision making. Maybe we can organize the possible projects around the mission, right? Orient toward the goal. Fair enough. But the problem is, I'm being slightly facetious here, but really, if your goal is supporting decision making and your research team is very small and not that much has been done, like everything will help. So everything here does get us closer to that high altitude goal. It's defined pretty broadly. It's all very impactful. So teasing those things apart is not actually that easy. So what broke here? The map is, well, one, is my mental model. It's a researcher's mental model. It's my sort of expert model. And it's really hard for people to develop fluency in that craft that I've just spent like decades working in. And two, at an even higher level, I don't think they care. Like, they don't wake up in the morning trying to figure out how to broaden my research practice or have a more mature research practice. It's just not, that's just not it, right? That's just not their concern. And finally, this mission that I talked about supporting decision, or however you define that on your team, you can't really use it to prioritize anything. It's just too abstract. So, without a shared definition of success, you cannot refine your practice at all. You have to have something that is an interface between you and your stakeholders that will help you have a dialogue about what matters and what you should do next. So these quotes are all things that I have heard from various leadership in different jobs that I've had in my career. And I think the thing that I want to point out about it is, so if somebody that you're working with a VP of design says, like, I only want to utilize research when it's additive, that's a 30-minute conversation about what do you mean by additive? And tell me about a time when it was. Tell me about a time when it wasn't. And so all of these words, right, strategic, additive, wins, they all really need quite a bit of unpacking in order for us to have a productive conversation with our partners about whether we're getting the right outcomes. So this is where it kind of fell off the rails. This is where I pick myself back up. Part 3, in which I apply a simple principle I knew all along. So the great part, and Christina alluded to this earlier today, is that we're researchers. We're actually quite good at understanding people's mental models. And so knowing that you don't have it right, looked at another way, you're like, I do actually have the methods for this. So, simple question, what job to be done is my organization hiring me to do? Right? We're actually pretty good at answering these types of questions. And I think this is right. I think this is more or less the job to be done, but as with most jobs to be done projects, the altitude at which you define this is really dictates the success of the project. And the follow-up to that is, when is the job to be done satisfied? And is research a function you'd hire for that? If you just said support decision making, would they choose us? Or might they choose another function, right? For which job to be done are we truly uniquely suitable for answering? So this is how I came to this idea of outcomes. Like I said before, it doesn't matter to me whether you choose, whether you like the word outcomes. I ended up choosing it because there were other organizational initiatives that started to use this pattern and called it outcomes, and I was like, I will 100% piggyback on that. I would highly recommend that strategy for people, by the way. Things that are working in your organization, copy them, and then just go with it. So I want to talk through where we actually landed. So there are 3. I think that's actually really important, that there not be 1 and there not be 12, right? There's like some sweet spot there. The first one we call confident iteration. So the end result here is that Figma makes faster, more confident decisions. So that's the organizational benefit. And then the research team's ownership or area of accountability is facilitating continuous connection with target user groups during development. And what I think this does as an outcome is it really highlights when we will be successful, because the anti-pattern to making faster, confident decisions is pretty well known internally, right? It's that moment where a product development process stalls out because people, there's thrashiness because people are like, oh, which of these paths to go, right? It's not making a mistake, it's not knowing what to do about that mistake that this type of outcome is trying to avoid. The second one I call shared framing. So the organizational benefit, Figma is aligned as an organization around a shared set of customer frameworks. And the thing that the research team is uniquely responsible for is describing people and their needs in clear, descriptive ways. And I want to notice and call out that this isn't about being the owner or arbiter of customer needs, right? It's about being a consolidator. There are many, many, many teams that have a lot of great data and a lot of great information about what customers need. What research is uniquely good at among those types of functions is things like frameworks, right? So being the one that has the canonical journey map, or user types, or the 4 major problems in the designer-developer handoff, right? Like having those things that create vocabulary for having conversations about what people need and who they are, that's what this outcome is trying to get at. And then finally, nope, too far. Wow, that was far. Okay, new directions. So Figma has innovative, bold ideas for new initiatives to pursue, and the research team's responsibility in that outcome is exposing Figma to people's needs, values, and behaviors outside the context of our products. So one of the unique things that the research team does is talk to people who do not use the product, or the workflows surrounding the product, or people that, churn. There's all these things that are surrounding behaviors that are often huge sites of innovative opportunities. Also notice that I am not arguing that the research team is responsible for the ideas themselves, right? That would be hugely anathema culturally to, at least at Figma. I don't know about where you work, but you cannot just come in with like, ideas come from research, right? Innovation comes from research, right? No, please. That's just like automatic organ rejection. So I think what I want to highlight about all 3 of these things is that they're very specific to Figma, and that I think I have, I've sort of absorbed the things that are working well in our cultural values. But I also feel like there's quite a bit here that is useful in other contexts as well. I'll wait and not push the button again because we know that's not going to work. So what worked about this approach? I can talk to my cross-functional partners about where these outcomes are happening and where they are not happening. They're concrete enough that we can say, I saw it there, but not there. We can talk about areas of the organization where we need to dial up or dial down, right? Like, we don't need them equally and everywhere across the org, right? So you can identify particular places where we need a little more new direction, that type of stuff. And then finally, we can track whether projects have their particular impacts. So some projects are particularly organized around driving one of these outcomes, and then we can say, okay, did that produce the shared framing it intended or not? So the big takeaway from this section is co-create the outcome statements that you want to be accountable for. I think accountability is actually a really important word here. I think accountability is actually the language and vocabulary of an organization, and trying to engage with it at that level and say, yes, you can put me on the hook for something. I am responsible for something, and if this doesn't happen, you can come to me, right? That's the type of relationship that I want to have with my cross-functional partners. And I think the question to answer when you're trying to sort this out is like, if we were wildly successful, what is different about the organization? What will be true? And now I have a dance. Summary, that was not worth the wait, was it? Okay, don't let other people's requests define your research practice. And don't let research methods and process and our craft define your research practice. Good research is the effect you have on your organization. I'll just say it. I know we're trying to let everyone define it themselves, but that's what I think. And outcome statements can be a useful way of co-creating that shared understanding of what good looks like, right? Because what you really need is not just your own definition of what good research is, but one that you share with your stakeholders so they can give you feedback on whether or not this is actually happening for them or not. These are the three that I came up with my stakeholders. I do not think these are the only three that exist. I do think there's probably a relatively reasonable number of set of things I think that the community can co-create. So what I would love to invite people to do here is to come and collaborate with me to create a shared vocabulary about expected outcomes that other teams and other research practitioners can reuse. So please reach out if you would like to build on this with me. This file and all the frameworks that I've shown are currently public in the Figma community. You can find my page there. So you can remix and just let me know what you do with it. Thanks.